China has not always been the formidable power we see today. There was a time when it was weak, divided, and humiliated by foreign powers. Wars, famines, poverty, everything seemed to condemn this country to failure. But one man decided to change China's destiny. A man history would remember by the name of Mao Zedong. Mao was not an ordinary leader. He was at once a strategist, a philosopher, and a revolutionary. His goal was not only to take power, but to awaken a people, to give them back their dignity, to rebuild a nation out of chaos. And to do this, he used methods that were often harsh, sometimes controversial, but remarkably effective. What he built was more than a political system. It was a state of mind, a culture of discipline, sacrifice, and collective responsibility. He taught his people that freedom is not begged for, it is built. That sovereignty is not achieved through speeches, but through work and rigor. Today, China is the second world power. Its cities shine, its industries dominate, and its influence extends across all continents. Yet behind this success lies a truth that many forget: this achievement was born from pain. It is the fruit of a revolution, a vision, and a discipline that Mao imposed on his people. But if China managed to rise again, one question remains: why does Africa remain stuck? Why do our nations, rich in resources and talent, still struggle to take off? Why do so many African peoples continue to depend on the outside, 60 years after independence? In this video, we will study Mao Zedong's strategy, not to imitate it, but to understand the principles that transformed a submissive nation into a respected power. We will compare yesterday's China with today's Africa, analyze the differences, the mistakes, and above all, the opportunities. Because, in the end, what Mao did for China, a determined continent could do for Africa. Africa has known colonization. It still lives with the effects of neocolonialism. Many of its leaders are merely representatives of their former metropoles. Its economies depend on raw exports, international aid, or ever-growing debt. Meanwhile, its populations exhaust themselves waiting for a miracle. But the miracle never comes. Not without discipline. Not without courage. Not without vision. Mao Zedong understood that great transformations are not born from comfort, but from mastered suffering. He knew that to build a new China, one first had to destroy old dependencies. He re-educated his people, sometimes with harshness, but always with a clear goal: that China would never again be a submissive nation. And what if Africa needs the same awakening? Not a providential man, but a collective spirit. A moral and political surge. A strong African ideology, rooted in our realities, carried by our youth, and supported by national discipline. Because the real battle is no longer military. It is psychological, economic, and cultural. What Mao understood is that the greatest battle of a people is the battle for its consciousness. Before Mao, China was not a power. It was a wounded nation, impoverished, fragmented, and humiliated. Between the 19th and the early 20th century, it experienced one of the darkest periods in its history. Foreign powers had literally divided its territory among themselves. Britain, France, Germany, Russia, Japan, and even the United States had imposed their rule. Chinese ports had become foreign zones. Shanghai, Canton, Tianjin, Qingdao, so many cities where the Chinese flag no longer meant anything. It all began with the Opium Wars. The British wanted to sell drugs to the Chinese people. The emperor resisted. But London responded with force. China lost. And from that moment on, the so-called unequal treaties multiplied. Chinese sovereignty collapsed. Its wealth was looted. Its people were humiliated. Western powers imposed their own laws, their courts, their customs systems. China became an economy of dependence. Foreigners controlled trade, currency, and ports. Even the railways and mines belonged to others. Meanwhile, the Chinese elite fought among themselves and served foreign interests. Japan, on its side, saw China as a land to conquer. After the War of 1894, it took Korea, then Manchuria. In 1937, it invaded the country, massacred civilians in Nanking, and imposed its domination. China had become nothing but a field of ruins. An ancient empire had turned into a body without a soul, a nation without direction. This period, from 1840 to 1949, is known as the Century of Humiliation. A century during which China lost everything: its sovereignty, its economy, and its confidence. But in this darkness, one man refused to bow his head: Mao Zedong. He was not a general from the elite. He came from the people, from the mountains of Hunan. The son of a peasant, nourished by the suffering and anger of his time, he no longer wanted a submissive China. He wanted a China that stood tall. His struggle was not only political, it was psychological. Mao understood that true domination does not come from weapons, but from the mind. As long as the Chinese people thought like the dominated, they would remain dominated. So he undertook to transform this mentality, to revive national dignity, cultural pride, and collective discipline. And here, the parallel with contemporary Africa becomes obvious. What China experienced in the 19th century, Africa is still experiencing today. Its resources are plundered, its debts imposed, its governments influenced. Some leaders obey Paris, London, or Washington more than their own people. And like China once did, Africa waits to be respected without having rebuilt its own strength. Yet within this silent system of humiliation, some rise. New voices, like that of Captain Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso, remind the world that sovereignty is not a word, but an attitude. He speaks as Mao once did, with conviction, courage, and a deep sense of urgency. He calls for rupture, for dignity, for the unity of African peoples. And that disturbs, just as Mao disturbed his era. Mao wanted to free China from its colonial chains. Traoré wants to free Africa from its own. One fought against the European powers of the 19th century. The other confronts the neo-colonial structures of the 21st. In both cases, the battle is the same, a battle for consciousness, for sovereignty, for honor. Mao once said, "A nation that wants to rise again must first learn to walk alone." That is the lesson Africa must remember. Before hoping for the world's help, it must relearn how to believe in itself. China found in Mao a direction, an ideology, a path. Africa is still searching for hers. But every awakening begins with awareness. And this chapter of Chinese history may just be the mirror of what Africa must accomplish today. Mao Zedong was not only a revolutionary. He was a strategist, a visionary, and a builder of minds. He knew that victory depended not only on weapons, but on the conviction of men. In a country destroyed, hungry, and lost, he gave the Chinese people a new sense of duty and a common purpose. He transformed peasants into soldiers, workers into activists, and intellectuals into servants of the nation. His strength did not come from wealth or technology, but from the faith he inspired. Mao spoke to the heart of the people. He said that revolution was not a choice, but a necessity. That the freedom of a people can never be offered, but must be earned. He did not want symbolic independence. He wanted total transformation, social, economic, and cultural. He understood that the true strength of a nation lies in the unity of its people. And to unite a people, one must give them a cause, a direction, and a common enemy, dependence. Mao made discipline the foundation of his system. He demanded work, rigor, and sacrifice. He called on every citizen to serve an idea greater than themselves. This is what he called the new Chinese man, a man trained to think collectively, to work for the nation, to believe that greatness does not come from comfort, but from perseverance. For him, poverty was not a curse. It was a starting point. The Chinese people, he believed, had to learn to create, to produce, to build, with what they had, without waiting for help from anyone. This philosophy of autonomy, which he summed up as relying on our own strength, changed China's destiny. Mao understood that economic dependence is a form of modern slavery. He encouraged local production, ideological education, and collective discipline. He said, "A nation without political consciousness is a nation without a future." He believed that education should serve national transformation, not personal comfort. Schools, factories, and the countryside all had to be directed toward one goal: building a new, strong, and sovereign China. This idea shocked some, but it revealed a universal truth: a nation is not built with speeches, but with vision and firm direction. Mao knew that any profound change provokes resistance. He faced criticism, betrayal, and failure. But he never backed down. For him, every sacrifice had meaning. Every pain was part of the liberation process. He went through wars, famines, and crises, but he kept his course. And it is this constancy that made him a symbol. Africa needs this same state of mind. Not a cult of personality, but conscious leadership. Leadership that dares to impose discipline before comfort, production before consumption, and pride before dependence. Mao said, "If you want to change the world, start by changing the thinking of your people." Africa still suffers from an inherited mindset, a colonial mentality that makes us believe salvation will always come from the outside. But China's history proves the opposite. No one will liberate you in your place. Liberation is an inner construction before it is an external conquest. Mao used symbols, culture, and education as weapons. The Little Red Book, revolutionary songs, slogans on walls, all served to awaken collective consciousness. It was not just propaganda, it was a psychological strategy. He knew that to change a people, you must first change what they believe is possible. In Africa, this work remains to be done. Our people still doubt their own power. They admire others but hesitate to believe in themselves. Yet all development begins with faith in one's own value. Mao did not ask for permission to exist. He imposed respect through determination, discipline, and the clarity of his vision. And that is the true lesson: no nation rises again without a clear direction and a people ready to pay the price. Mao was not perfect. His mistakes were costly. But his determination transformed a civilization. And it is this mentality that Africa must rediscover, that of autonomy, pride, and duty. Because in the end, development is not aid received, it is a decision made. Mao Zedong understood a truth that few leaders dare to face: you do not build a country with promises, but with strategy. His own was built on three simple yet formidable pillars: autonomy, unity, and discipline. Three words that would transform a ruined nation into a global power. The first pillar was economic autonomy. Mao knew that China had to produce what it consumed. He no longer wanted to depend on the West for rice, coal, or steel. He said, "A people who eat thanks to another are never free." So he launched the policy of relying on our own strength. Villages were encouraged to become self-sufficient. Peasants learned to cultivate better, to store, and to make their own tools. Local factories were built, sometimes with rudimentary means, but with incredible energy. It was not a perfect economy, but it was an economy of survival, dignity, and pride. Mao wanted every village to be a small China, capable of resisting any embargo or foreign pressure. And this philosophy, even today, remains the foundation of Chinese power. The second pillar was national unity. Mao knew that China was vast and diverse, crossed by different cultures and languages. But he believed that a divided nation could never be strong. He therefore imposed a collective identity, that of the Chinese people, united around a common destiny. He fought warlords, internal factions, and ideological divisions. He said, "For too long we have been 100 small kingdoms. From now on, we will be one nation." He taught the people that national brotherhood was more important than personal interests. This unity was not easy. It was built through pain, sometimes even fear. But without it, China would never have risen again. And this is where the parallel with Africa becomes striking. Africa speaks of pan-Africanism but often acts in a scattered order. Nations oppose each other, leaders mistrust one another, and peoples divide over borders drawn by others. Mao erased old divisions and built a sense of national belonging. This is what Africa still lacks: unity that transcends ethnicities, languages, and inherited borders. The third pillar was collective discipline. Mao believed that without rigor, without work, and without sacrifice, no revolution could survive. He demanded total commitment, not only from soldiers, but from every citizen. He said, "He who does not work for the people does not deserve to be part of it." Discipline was not a constraint, it was a source of pride. Every worker, every peasant, every student felt responsible for national progress. One had to build, produce, learn, and serve. The Chinese people understood that freedom without duty is only an illusion. This idea gave birth to a generation of tireless, disciplined workers, ready to build their future. Africa needs this mentality more than ever. Too many African countries seek progress without effort, development without planning, recognition without collective work. But there is no miracle. There is only discipline, the discipline that pushes a people to rise early, to work hard, to build their roads, schools, and industries, without waiting for others to do it for them. Mao did not offer China a comfortable democracy. He gave it a solid foundation. He gave his people a taste for responsibility. And even though his methods were harsh, they produced results that the whole world can see today. Great nations are always built on three foundations: an independent economy, strong unity, and national discipline. Africa lacks neither resources nor talent. What it lacks is a clear strategy and the collective courage to apply it. Mao showed that no people are too poor to rise again, but any people can remain poor if they refuse rigor. It is there, in this lesson, that lies the key to Africa's rebirth. Today's Africa looks like China once did. Rich, but dependent. Full of potential, yet trapped by its contradictions. A continent blessed by nature, but weakened by division. The resources are there. The talent is there. But direction is missing. Foreign powers, as once in China, exploit our wealth, dictate our policies, and influence our decisions. Former colonial powers still control our economies through debt, trade agreements, and international financial institutions. Our raw materials leave our ports unprocessed, only to return transformed, sold 10 times more expensive. This modern dependence is not a fate, but the result of a strategy written by others in our place. China, in the 19th century, was in the same situation: colonized, divided, dependent. It chose to break free. Africa, however, still hesitates. It denounces, but does not break. It criticizes, but continues to extend its hand. It speaks of sovereignty, yet still signs agreements that keep it under supervision. The problem is not only economic, it is mental. It is a question of perception, of pride, of collective will. China understood that humiliation must become energy, not habit. It turned shame into a driving force. Africa, on the other hand, has turned suffering into resignation. We have normalized dependence. We have learned to survive, not to overcome. And yet, the parallels are clear. The China of the past century and the Africa of today share the same wounds: domination, division, loss of confidence. What made the difference was the response. Mao imposed a hard line: rely on yourself, whatever the cost. Africa is still looking for permission to free itself. But freedom is not asked for, it is imposed. As long as we remain divided, as long as each African country pursues its own interests, we will remain weak. Unity is not a slogan, it is a strategy. It is what gives political weight, economic power, and diplomatic credibility. Mao united peoples of different languages, religions, and cultures around a single dream. Why can't Africa do the same? We speak of pan-Africanism, yet we trade more with the outside world than among ourselves. We create regional alliances, yet undermine our own neighbors. We demand dignity, but we are not ready to pay the price. Mao said, "Without struggle, there is no progress." Africa wants progress without struggle, prosperity without transformation, independence without sacrifice. That is not how great nations are born. A people do not develop through words, but through collective work and shared awareness. African leaders must understand that governing is not about managing poverty, but about creating wealth. And that wealth will not come from foreign aid, but from the valorization of our own resources. Our lands, our raw materials, our mines, these are our true assets. But as long as they are exploited by others, we will remain spectators of our own wealth. China decided to turn its weaknesses into strengths. It took its peasants and made them producers. It took its workers and made them builders. It took its humiliations and made them a strategy for revenge. Africa must do the same, transform pain into determination, dependence into discipline, anger into courage. Some countries are beginning to understand this. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger show that another path is possible. These nations dare to say no. They remind us that sovereignty is not a political speech, but an act of faith. The road will be long, difficult, and often lonely. But China, too, once walked alone before being respected. And if the 21st century is to be Africa's, it will not be thanks to charity, but thanks to courage. Africa lacks neither heroes nor causes. What it lacks is coherence between speech and action. We want change, but we fear the chaos it requires. We want greatness, but we reject the discipline that prepares it. Mao said, "History punishes those who dream without acting." If Africa wants to change its destiny, it must stop dreaming and start building. China has shown the way. The rest depends on us. What Africa can learn from Mao Zedong goes beyond politics and ideology. It is a matter of mentality, vision, and collective courage. Mao proved that a disciplined, united people, conscious of its mission, could transform poverty into power. He did not wait for perfect conditions, he created them. He did not ask for permission to succeed, he imposed it. And it is precisely this attitude that Africa must rediscover if it wishes to write its own renaissance. The first lesson is discipline before democracy. Mao knew that a people without order cannot be free. Before talking about freedom, one must learn responsibility. Before claiming rights, one must understand duties. He imposed collective rigor, sometimes harsh, but necessary, because discipline forges the character of a nation. It turns fear into courage, laziness into productivity, and disorder into progress. Africa dreams of modernity but without rigor. It wants results without method. The day every African understands that freedom is earned through effort, the continent will change its face. The second lesson is unity before prosperity. Mao understood that division is the first weapon of foreign powers. He erased mental, religious, and social boundaries to rebuild a China united around one cause. Africa, on the other hand, remains a prisoner of its divisions. Colonial borders continue to separate peoples who once shared the same history, language, and culture. And as long as these divisions remain stronger than our will to unite, we cannot speak of African power. Unity is not a romantic idea, it is a strategy. A united Africa would have a market of more than 1 billion consumers, a continental army, a stable currency, and a respected voice in the world. The third lesson is ideological education. Mao knew that the real revolution is won first in the minds. He invested in political education, not only in schools, but also in the countryside, in factories, and in villages. He wanted every citizen to understand why he must work, sacrifice, and believe in his country. Africa has neglected this battle. We have trained graduates, but not patriots. We have built schools, but without teaching the pride of being African. As long as our children dream more of Europe or America than of Africa, we will remain dependent. Education must once again become a weapon of liberation. It must create a new generation that is conscious, disciplined, and visionary. The fourth lesson is economic autonomy. Mao built China on the principle of doing with what we have. He refused dependence on foreign institutions. Africa, however, has done the opposite. Our countries live on loans, aid, and donations. This dependence has a price, the loss of sovereignty. Every external aid is an invisible chain. We must learn to produce locally, to transform our resources, to build our own industries. It is not a matter of wealth, but of will. Africa does not lack means, it lacks vision and organization. Finally, the fifth lesson is courageous leadership. Mao did not seek to please, he sought to build. He made unpopular, sometimes brutal, but strategic decisions. He knew that leading often means being hated today to be understood tomorrow. Too often, African leadership tries to please everyone, avoid risks, and maintain the status quo. But history does not remember the timid, it remembers the bold. Africa needs leaders capable of making hard choices, of saying no to dependence, no to corruption, no to manipulation. Leaders capable of uniting their people around a national project, not around a political party. Development is not a miracle, it is a strategy. Mao showed that poverty is not an obstacle, but a starting point. He showed that a disciplined people can defy empires. Africa can do it too. It only needs to believe in its own strength, to stop comparing itself, and to understand that greatness is never given, it is conquered. Nothing will change as long as we wait for a savior. It is not a man we must hope for, but a state of mind we must adopt, a spirit of work, courage, dignity, and solidarity. That is what Mao left to China. And that is what Africa must rediscover if it wishes to write its own century. Mao Zedong did not only change China. He changed the perception a people can have of themselves. His greatest victory was not military, but mental. He transformed a humiliated people into a proud one, a passive people into a creative one, a dependent people into a sovereign one. That is where the final lesson for Africa lies. The real struggle of this century is not only economic or political. It is a battle of conscience. As long as Africans do not believe in their own value, no reform will ever last. As long as we think solutions will come from outside, we will keep repeating the same mistakes. Mao made his people understand that salvation would never come from foreign aid, but from inner discipline. China suffered, but it learned. Africa still suffers, but refuses to learn. We have replaced the visible chains of colonization with invisible ones: debt, food dependence, and cultural domination. We have learned to consume before learning to produce, to speak of others before believing in ourselves. Yet, like the China of the past, Africa has within it everything it needs to rise again. Fertile lands, a vast youth, immense natural resources, and a unique creativity. What is missing is not wealth, but coherence. What is missing is not capacity, but will. Mao said, "The most dangerous enemy is not the one who fights you, but the one who puts you to sleep." And that is exactly what our peoples are experiencing. We have been lulled by promises, by dependence, by fear of change. Yet, it only takes one people to awaken for everything to shift. China proved it. It said no to submission, no to dependence, no to fatalism. It accepted the suffering of change. It accepted to deprive itself today in order to prosper tomorrow. Africa must make the same choice. It must stop behaving like a victim of history and become once again the actor of its destiny. It must stop waiting and start acting. Leaders must stop seeking external validation and listen to the voice of their peoples. Peoples must stop waiting for saviors and become themselves the builders of their own future. Africa must learn to say no, even when that no disturbs. Say no to dependence, no to corruption, no to mediocrity. Say yes to discipline, to rigor, to collective work. Say yes to dignity. Mao proved that national dignity is earned by the sweat of the brow, not through diplomatic negotiations. China suffered a century of humiliation but drew a century of lessons from it. Africa suffered 5 centuries of domination but has not yet turned that pain into strength. This delay is not irreversible. It only takes a collective awakening, a shared vision, a generation ready to give everything to free the African spirit. We must understand that the future is not planned in Paris, London, or Washington. It is built in Bamako, in Ouagadougou, in Kinshasa, in Lagos, in Johannesburg. It is here, on this land, that the destiny of the continent will be decided. The world will never respect an Africa that does not respect itself. Respect cannot be begged, it must be earned. China rose from colony to superpower because it dared to believe in itself. Africa will become powerful the day it does the same. Mao said, "It takes a spark to start a fire." That spark is conscience, a conscience that burns away fear, lights the path, and pushes to action. When that conscience is shared from one end of the continent to the other, Africa will rise. Not with slogans, but with actions. Not with divisions, but with a common will. The Africa of the future will not be the one that imitates, but the one that inspires. It will no longer ask permission to exist, it will impose its presence through work, discipline, and unity. That is the true revolution. It is not about copying China, but learning from its courage. Mao awakened a sleeping giant. Africa is still asleep. But the day it opens its eyes, the entire world will change its balance. In a harsh, unequal, and often ruthless world, those who succeed are not necessarily the richest or the luckiest, but those who have learned to forge themselves. This is what China understood with Mao Zedong, and this is what Africa is beginning to understand today with Ibrahim Traoré. These two men, separated by time and by continents, share the same conviction: change never comes from the outside. It is born in conscience and inner discipline. They remind us that to transform a nation, we must first transform individuals. Because without personal development, there is no collective development. Here are 6 great lessons inspired by their journeys, 6 pillars for succeeding in this tough, complex, and sometimes unfair life. The first lesson is clarity of mission. Neither Mao nor Traoré acted out of personal ambition. They had a vision, a goal greater than themselves. They knew where they were going and why. In life, many fail not from a lack of talent, but from a lack of direction. When you do not know why you get up, the smallest difficulty makes you give up. Having a mission means having a compass. It means knowing that your pain has meaning, that your effort has a destination. In a world full of distractions, clarity is your most precious weapon. Without it, you get lost on other people's paths. The second lesson is inner discipline. Success is not a matter of luck, it is a matter of habit. Ibrahim Traoré often repeats it through his actions: you cannot lead a people without first leading yourself. Leadership begins with self-discipline. It is the ability to control yourself when everything around you invites you to ease. It is saying no to what shines but does not build. It is staying focused when others scatter. He who has no self-control becomes a slave to his impulses. And in this world, the impulsive are always manipulated by the disciplined. The third lesson is moral courage. Traoré dared to say no when many said yes. Mao resisted when everything seemed lost. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is the decision to act despite fear. In life, there will be moments when you are alone, when no one encourages you, when even those you help will betray you. But it is in those moments that character is forged. True courage is not about fighting others, it is about continuing to move forward when doubt wants to stop you. Without courage, every dream remains an illusion. The fourth lesson is responsibility. Great men do not look for excuses, they look for solutions. Ibrahim Traoré does not spend his time accusing colonialism. He acts. He builds. He decides. He knows that history does not reward complaints, but results. Likewise, in your own life, nothing will change as long as you think everything depends on others. Responsibility means accepting that your destiny lies in your own hands. It is not a burden, it is freedom. Because from the moment you understand that everything depends on you, no one can stop you. The fifth lesson is faith in oneself. Mao believed in his people when the world despised them. Traoré believes in Africa when many still doubt. Faith in oneself is not arrogance, it is the certainty that you are capable of rising again, even after the fall. It is the silent conviction that pushes you to start again and again, when everything seems lost. Believing in yourself means refusing to give up. It is the greatest form of resistance. And in a world where everyone tells you that it is impossible, believing in yourself becomes a revolutionary act. The sixth lesson is solidarity. No great project is built alone. Mao understood this. Traoré proves it. Individual success without solidarity is an illusion. True progress is when your success inspires others, when your victory becomes a door for your people. In life, help those who want to move forward. Share your knowledge, your experience, your energy. Because a selfish mind always ends up alone, but a mind driven by solidarity leaves a mark. He who lifts others lifts himself. The world will not change with brilliant individuals, but with conscious and united communities. These are the 6 pillars of success in this difficult life: clarity, discipline, courage, responsibility, faith, and solidarity. These values are not theories, they are weapons. They forge nations as they forge destinies. This is what Mao transmitted to China, and what Traoré is trying to embody for Africa. Personal development is not a trend, it is a survival strategy. Because in this world, he who does not build himself inwardly will always be dominated by those who have learned to do so. We now reach the end of this reflection, but the real work begins here. The world does not reward spectators, it rewards actors. If you want your life to change, start by changing your mind. If you want your people to rise, start by rising yourself. Greatness is not a destination, it is a behavior repeated every day. Africa will awaken the day every African understands that power is not found in Paris or in Washington, but in his own mind. The day we learn to think, to produce, to act for ourselves, no one will ever dominate us again. Mao did it for China. Ibrahim Traoré shows the way for Africa. It is up to us to continue the path. Because history waits for no one. It moves forward with those who dare.